On September 18th, 2020, Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. The next day, my world suddenly filled up, as it often did, by taking care of my 94-year-old mother who suddenly needed a blood transfusion. Not an emergency exactly, and not unusual for her at that time, but a thing to be handled nevertheless. I handled it, as caregivers like me do every day. My brothers and I constantly texting. I did not feel alone or resentful and actually felt grateful to have something to do while I absorbed the shock of Ruth's death. I took care of my mother in honor of Ruth. In my imagination, Ruth and my mother, the Honorable Frederica Brenneman, meld, the smoke from two individual fires merging, circling, dancing with one another. There's a picture of my mother with Ruth, commemorating all the female judges who were Harvard Law School graduates. Ruth was the star, of course, but my mother was the actual trailblazer. My mother was in the first class of women at Harvard Law School, 5 years before Ruth. She was the second female judge to be put on the bench in the state of Connecticut when I was 3 years old. Ruth and Frederica also shared the deep belief in equal protection under the law. They understood profoundly systemic discrimination, the marginalization of the disempowered, the callousness of capitalism. They created laws where there were none, laws that exist to this day, that changed the culture forever. And once glimpsed, equity does not easily slink back into the dark. The spirit of Ruth and Freddie allows me to have the life I lead today. They showed me what it was to have agency over my life, to pursue an education, to follow my dream of being a working artist, to imagine being a boss, to earn money, choose if and when to have children, and to know how to choose a man who was not threatened by my agency, but celebrated it. My mother's cognition could get drifty sometimes, and her dementia would come and go. And that night, after she got home from a long afternoon in the ER, I called to say goodnight and tell her I loved her, that I was proud of her for all sorts of reasons. And she said to me, "Now that there's a vacancy on the court, you should apply." I laughed and said that I didn't have a law degree, so that might be difficult. She said she didn't think it would be a problem. And she's right. In the fight for equal justice under the law, it's all hands on deck. It will take all of us to fill a Ruth-size hole. So let's get cracking. Postscript. My mother died 6 months after I wrote this. She died 6 months after Amy Coney Barrett, a handmaid in a conservative Catholic sect, was installed under the literal cover of night to replace Ruth. I had sensed her death was imminent and said all the things, that I loved her, of course, and that I was there by her side. I said those words after receiving my first COVID shot, which was 6 weeks after the inauguration of Joe Biden. So I said that too. I thanked her for being with me throughout the Trump presidency and the terrifying beginning days of COVID. I also asked forgiveness for dragging her to all the hot Southern California women's marches in her wheelchair. I painted her a simple picture, like a children's book. A horrible president was ousted, a plague had been felled. I wanted her to know that she could die in peace, that her loved ones were going to be okay. And of course, I wanted to believe that children's book myself. But a year later, it turns out the story was much more complicated. The story involves well-connected anti-democratic insurrectionists who are bold in their attempt to stay in power at all costs, defying subpoenas, broadcasting lies, curbing voting rights and women's rights and civil rights, and. However, what I wrote in September 2020 remains even more true today. It will take all of us to fill the Ruth-size hole she left behind. And it will take all of us to fill the hole my mother left behind as well. It will take all of our creativity, courage, confidence, and compassion to make the world a better place, a more just and equitable place, as Ruth and Frederica did before us. Maybe my mother knew, in her drifty dementia, that prerequisites are not important in the fight for democracy, and a law degree isn't necessary in the fight for justice. Now is the time to grab hands, join hearts, open our checkbooks, and ignite our collective imagination to protect and perhaps create anew the promise of American democracy. Maybe 2022 is just as much as an all hands on deck moment as 2020 was. So let's get cracking.
Thank you so much for that, Amy. It's, it reminds me of just all the people who've come before us and how much the fight for justice continues. But it also really brings up for me one of our guiding principles at Crimson Goes Blue, which is everyone can be an activist. And I want to hear from you, what it means to you to be an activist right now.
I think it's like folding in 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour of activism every day, just like an exercise regimen. So when I get antsy or alone in my head, I write letters. Like I feel like activism used to mean something every once in a while or during election cycles. And I feel like a worker among workers. I just feel like it's just an everyday practice, and I didn't really think of that before. Even in 2020, I was like, "Shoo! I don't have to think about it for a while," and I don't think that way anymore. But doing a little bit every day keeps me from panicking, quite honestly, and it keeps me connected to community, which really helps.
Yeah, no, we're all doing our little piece. I'm hopeful that everybody here will kind of figure out what their piece is. And I think some people have a lot of time to give, some people have less, but there's something for all of us. And I think you really exemplify that. And it sounds like your mom was a big example to you.
Maybe every generation, maybe every year, we get to show up anew for whatever values we share. Um, and and yes, on the one hand, it's like we can never relax, but it's like in a way, well, that's what democracy is supposed to be. You're not actually supposed to check out, right? And let other people do it. So in a way, it's like the truths of maybe how the system is supposed to work, which is like a little bit of awareness and activism all the time, rather than every 4 years people freak out.
Yeah, it's participatory.
Correct.
That's the idea, right? Of the people.
That is the system.
Yeah, that's the system we have. Some days it feels like that system is crumbling, but I think that's really what we're fighting for now,
Yes.
saving our democracy.